I'm Savannah Ostrowski, a program manager, and this is UX Pursuit.
Welcome to UX Pursuit, a podcast dedicated to the unique stories and journeys of UX practitioners, how they got where they are today, what hurdles they overcame, and what advice they have for those currently pursuing UX. I'm Tim Bridgham, your host, and my hope is that these conversations might help and inspire those who are currently in their own pursuit of a UX career. Program management. How does that involve UX? Before talking with Savannah, I wasn't exactly sure, so it was great getting to connect with her and learn more about how she has mixed her passion for development with her passion for UX. Our UX paths overlapped at Blink for a short spell, and it was easy to see her passion for both people and UX. I think you'll be able to pick up that in our conversation, so I hope you enjoy it. Well, Savannah, thank you so much for taking time today to chat and to share your UX journey. I'd love to learn more about kind of how you got to where you are. So maybe we could start at the beginning, wherever that might be.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. I love UX, so I'm happy to chat. My career in UX is like kind of all over the place. So going way back, I in college had no idea what I wanted to do. Like most people in college, fell into like a weird blend of computer science and technical geography, and then through that kind of stumbled into software engineering, and worked in software engineering for a little while, and always kind of had this feeling of like not being totally satisfied just writing code. I felt like I was always like I liked writing code and I liked solving the problems, but I felt myself always asking questions like, but why are we building this? Or like, who are we building this for? And like I worked at a startup. In particular, this was like the pivotal moment for me, was like working at a startup, and we were in like, we were 5 people and we were trying to figure out what to build. And like, I just remember this feeling of like, do we do enough market research here or user research to figure out if this is what our customers are going to want? And so I think that was kind of like a catalyst for me to like start thinking about possibly becoming a UX designer.
Like when you were at this startup, were there UX researchers there, or just UX designers, or was it? No. Okay.
No to any of that. It was like one sales guy, a CTO, me as the only software engineer, an ops lead, and the CEO, and that was it. So it was very much like very scrappy and a really cool experience, and very grateful for that being my first job out of university. But it was definitely like a moment of like, okay, we're building this, but I don't think that it's quite right, and I don't know why it's not quite right. So it was, I don't know, it's kind of like this looming feeling. But like, I don't think I really understood what UX was at that point. Like I was like, oh, it's like people who make wireframes or something, I think, Got it. So was it at that point that you were like, I need to get into UX, or I need to learn more about this, or what was kind of the next after working at the startup for a while? Yeah, so I worked there, and then the CTO resigned and I was the only engineer, and I was like, okay, I'm fresh out of school. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to leave. So I left and kind of had like this moment of like, do I really want to be a software engineer? And so I actually applied to the HCDE master's program at the University of Washington, the Human Centered Design and Engineering program. And I was like, I'm going to apply. Don't know if I'm going to get in. Kind of interested in exploring this as like a possible career path, but if I don't get in, I don't get in, and we'll just figure it out. How did you hear about the HCDE program? I think I was like, so I was doing primarily like back-end engineering type work, and I was like, okay, like let's do some research about other roles that are in like engineering adjacent fields. And my husband was still works at Facebook. And he was working with a program manager, and he was like, I think you would like maybe really like this. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And this is like, 2016. And at that point I was like, well, it's kind of, I think that's like maybe a long-term dream. Don't think I'm ready for that fresh out of school. We'll be a software engineer for a while, kind of like pay my dues and then figure it out. And then I ended up switching into another software engineering role, and I got into the UW master's program and started that part time, and just like kind of fell in love with everything that I was learning and the people that I was with, and yeah, kind of. I think that was like another catalyst for like trying to weasel my way into UX, because then I convinced the consultancy I was working for to start doing user research more seriously and like led a big study for one of our clients to try and make sure that things were, they wanted an app, and I was like, okay, but what they had like a laundry list of features they wanted, and I was like, okay, you do not have the budget for all of those things. Like, let's try and figure it out. And so yeah, I think that was like my first real foray into like UX anything.
And that you did that while you were taking classes and working at the same time? You led this sort of research effort?
Yeah, so I was working full time as an engineer, and then like peppering in like user research with we had one of the consultancy had one designer, and her and I were like partnering on designing like a study and like a survey and like doing the whole bit to kind of understand the people that would be using this app. And then I was also attending school part-time, but that's kind of my style. I do a million things all at once, like kind of always. So.
Got it. Yeah. But I imagine you were sort of starting to, I know just because in the program, you take user-centered design and usability testing are early on in the program. So were you already like starting to apply those things you were learning in school in that project?
Yeah. And I remember being like, okay, well, let's do some research and then we can come up with a list of design requirements and then try and figure out solutions that meet those requirements. And I remember everyone being like, this is completely foreign. People do this? And I was like, yeah, guys, like.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I feel like that was, something that like kind of solidified. Well, I think what happened mainly in this whole journey was that I like started as a really back-end engineer and then like slowly was like, okay, like maybe I'll try, a full stack dev role where I'm doing a bit of front end and back end. And then I joined Blink as a front end engineer. And I was like, that'll be close enough to product, I think. Like that'll be it. And it wasn't. Shocker. I mean, I do love front end engineering. I think like it's exciting, but I think for me it was just like I wanted to figure out like what we should be building or like what like the users need, and not so much about like the implementation, if that makes sense. So I think like that's kind of like that's like the general progression of like how I got here. It was, 5 years ago that I like the idea of UX was planted in my mind.
Okay. So when you said you fell in love with UX when you started in the program, were you thinking like, I'm just going to apply UX to like my engineering background? Or were you thinking like, I'm going to become a UX researcher or a UX designer? Or what were you thinking about kind of at the beginning of your journey in grad school?
Yeah. So I think I was a little like delusional and was convinced. I was like, I need to be a software engineer. I need to. I have to do it because I was mainly like I took a couple of computer science classes in school, but I was mainly a self-taught engineer, and I had put in like a ton of effort into like feeling like I belonged in that space and like actually feeling like I wasn't just thinking that I was a software engineer and actually becoming a software engineer. And so at first I was like, I'll just be like a really well-rounded engineer who cares about design and just like, is receptive to the idea of like, there are user requirements that sometimes conflict with engineering requirements. Because I think everyone who has worked with, in the engineering design paradigm is cognizant that there can be tension there sometimes. And so I think like for me, I originally was like, I just want to speak the same language as like people that I'm working with and like actually understand like, oh, when you tell me to move this over by X pixels or this needs to be a different color, it's not like just a good designer doesn't just do that because it's like a trivial choice. It's just like there are actual reasons why we might want to do that. And then I think like as I took more classes, I was in like career limbo. I was like, do I want to be, at first I was like, I'm going to do UX design because it's like one step away from front end and I'm just going to, you know, it's an easy transition. It makes sense. But I actually think that out of like all of the fields in like pure UX, I guess, I would say that I've always felt most compelled with user research. And so that was something that I definitely thought about doing and definitely applied to like many roles in that space. I don't know. I feel like I'm very passionate and excited about like actually talking to customers or users and figuring out like what pain points they have. I think it's really empowering to figure out like, oh, you know, this one thing that might seem like really small actually like completely degrades my productivity or like turns this product into like a nightmare. And so I definitely kind of toyed around with the idea of going down like the user research route. And then kind of fell into program management, which I think for me is the best of all the worlds, especially in my current role. The role is very like I have a large set of responsibilities. Like I work on a very technical product, and I do like everything from like user research and like run the studies and like understand the developers that use my product to like actual like, you know, UX design for different configurations and settings and competitive analysis and market strategy and like lots of spec writing, community outreach type stuff. So I feel like it is, I felt like when I started in program management, it was right for me because I got to do a little bit of everything. And I was always like, I don't know if I want to commit to 40 hours a week of interviewing people or like, you know, doing user research or doing engineering work. So that kind of made sense, I think, for my like work style, at least so far.
Yeah. You said you kind of like to do lots of things when you were talking about you're starting in school and running a project and working full time and nice. So you kind of were, sounds like you were just sort of honing skills, trying to grow as much as you were, but you'd sort of wavered into, hey, I'm going to be a designer. Hey, I'll be a researcher. But it sounds like your engineering skill set kind of still made it through, I guess. I don't know if that's a fair statement. When you finished school, were you like applying then for jobs with an engineering focus, or were you looking more all around, or what was kind of your strategy?
Yeah. So I'm still in grad school.
Okay.
It's sure. Forever. No, I'm going to be done in March. It'll be fine. But I think that the flexibility of the program is really nice. There's certainly been terms where I've been like, okay, like we need to dial it in. There's so much work to be done here. But like overall, my experience in the master's program has been like astoundingly positive, and I would recommend it to anyone. Also, not just because the classes are great, but the people that you get to meet are just at least in my cohort, are like phenomenal, just like very intelligent, driven, motivated people, very inspiring. Like in my current role, like I think what really drew me to it is, so I work on a developer tool for Python, the Python programming language. And Python was my first programming language like 7 years ago. So I feel like I have like an affinity to the language, but also like working in this space, it makes it really easy to empathize with my users because I was an end user of my product. So I can like really, I don't know, I think it's really relatable for me when I hear someone, you know, have a gripe about something that they think we can be doing better. Or, you know, when I hear someone say like, oh, like your product made me like X times more productive, or, you know, helped me learn how to write Python. I think that's like really powerful. And I think that it makes it really easy for me to work on the product. But yeah, I think like ultimately I feel like I was always kind of looking for something like this role where I got to still kind of flex my engineering skills without actually writing code. And I get to work like pretty much embedded on an engineering team. And I get to like, have the design discussions about software and like kind of like listen in, and a lot of the decisions that I make are quite like technical and don't like my product doesn't have a UI. So a lot of it is, very like micro interaction-y and like very developer centric. And I think that's like kind of can be very challenging, but it's really exciting. So yeah, I think it's just like the right blend for me.
Great. You mentioned that, your previous knowledge in engineering and specifically the Python language, as well as empathy were sort of, skills or traits that help you in your job. Are there other qualities or skills you think someone looking to kind of get into program management, maybe with the splash of UX, what they should sort of look to grow in themselves?
Yeah, I mean, so the program management role at Microsoft, and I mean, pretty much everywhere, it really depends on the team that you're on. And so, like, if you're thinking that you want to go into program management at Microsoft or elsewhere, like, I think, you do like make sure you read the job description about the responsibilities because like they're depending on the team that you're on, they can be totally different. But I think like for me, there's and on the team that I'm on, like quite frankly, like I'm working on a product which is more tech, like my program management role is in some ways more technical than any engineering work I ever did. And so because it's just so low level, I think, the willingness to be wrong and to learn, because I don't know, as a program manager, especially with like a UX focus, I think I have to make decisions about some things, and I can do as much research as I can do, and then I make a decision, and sometimes I'm going to be wrong. Like I'm going to pick like something that was maybe not the right call or is like suboptimal for my users in some way. So I definitely get like the whole like learn it, like just a willingness to learn in that way. But also like on my engineering team, like I'm constantly asking naive questions. Like I ask like, okay, like I don't have the context here, but I'm going to ask my really naive or potentially like quote unquote stupid question, which, so yeah, I think like just like an eagerness to learn and like I really dig into like all parts of kind of the product life cycle. I actually, the thing I've been working on from January to June was a launch of a product the first launch of this product. So I got to like do everything from like the complete like set of features and testing it and running a dog food program and doing like social media and marketing and all of the, like performance measurements and making sure that the product was like pretty much good in all ways, like blog posts, the whole thing. And so I feel like multitasking and learning are like, for me, have been the most like crucial parts of my job, and just accepting that I don't know all the things.
Yeah. Blogging to user research. What a spectrum.
Oh yeah. Some weeks it's a little overwhelming, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I'm like, wow, like I have to like run a study and write a spec for a feature that's going to require me to do a ton of reading on super technical things. I need to give a talk. I need to, tweet about the release this week. So it's really multifaceted, which is definitely like part of why I don't think that I'm at all bored. But it's certainly, there are definitely competing deliverables most weeks.
Got it. I know your role at Blink when you were there, you said was more of a front-end development role, right? But I was working for a consultancy. How is working at a consultancy different than working at an agency or at a in-house, like at Microsoft? Has that been a big shift, or have you valued parts of either or both?
Yeah. In all honesty, when I joined Microsoft, this was the first, like, I'd done some consulting work for like big tech at a different consultancy, not Blink. And this was the first time I'd ever like been in-house at like a really big tech company. And I'd like heard people say like, expect things to move slower.
Okay.
Like, okay. And I think that was kind of like the biggest shock for me. Having worked at like 2 consultancies or agencies and then like a startup, an early stage startup, was that my brain is wired to like think about, okay, this week I got to build this many hours to like get this thing done. I want to ship this feature. I want to fix like however many bugs. But in my new role, it's like, it's faster in some ways and slower in others, where it's slower in that like I have a lot more wiggle room to do like all the due diligence around what I'm doing. And so sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to like look at all of like, look at the data and do user research and look at the survey results and like really like aggregate a ton of information before making a decision. And so sometimes I'm like, my consultancy brain is like yelling at me because I'm not doing things as fast as like I expect them to, but no one around me is expecting me to get it done that quickly. And I think that was like that alongside the whole like switching from being a builder to being like an architect of a product were like 2 like huge mindset shifts that I needed to make when I switched to working like at in-house.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think you mentioned earlier kind of doing the front end, like the actual building in the end, just kind of, you still had questions about like why you were building it. And then that's kind of why you like wanted to take a step like back further in the process. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah. I think like figuring out like the why, or what is the next highest priority thing for our users that would make them more happy. Like I think the ambiguity there is really exciting to me. A lot of the time when you're an engineer, the researchers have told the designers what requirements a design should have, and the designers design it. And then at the end of the day, you're just, implementing a bunch of stuff that's come down a pipeline. And there's nothing wrong with that. Certainly. I think for me, the main movement alongside the why is just the monotony of writing code for like as my full-time deliverable. I like code. I like writing code. I don't like writing it 40 hours a week. That's what I always say.
Got it. Well, it seems like that question that you had at the beginning of your startup kind of career when you were asking, hey, why are we doing this, making this decision? Like that has been sort of the common thread through everything. And now you're still getting to ask that question and, think in that mindset, which is really cool. I haven't had a lot of experience with engineering, and so to kind of hear and know that that's still a focus in engineering is super, super cool, because sometimes you just think, oh, they're just like, oh, I just got to build it, and I don't care about research, I don't care about design, I just got to build it. But that's probably a bad stereotype in my experience, or just not an open-mindedness.
I mean, I've certainly worked with like very thoughtful engineers that want to own like part of the product and like make sure that we're making the right decisions. But I also worked with other engineers who have been like, okay, we're going to make it scalable and performant and robust, and then we're going to build it and we're going to ship it. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, but if we did all those things and we didn't think about what we were building or why we were building it, we built the wrong thing, then it doesn't even matter, right? Like, and I think like for me, that was, I don't know, it's very anxiety inducing to think about like spending a bunch of time like, oh, I'm going to make, this call to this database even faster. And it's like, okay, but what about what about that interaction about like or what the user wants to do with your product? I don't know. It just seems, I don't know. Engineering in a silo isn't always the best idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
Got it. What other things do you feel like you've learned in your career that you think would be important for folks who are exploring a UX career, or engineers who are thinking they want to grow some UX skills?
I mean, I think I was very fortunate while working at Blink that I did some internships in college. I did one at a design consultancy down in San Francisco. And I feel like all the designers I've ever worked with have been very willing to share what they're working on. And so I think even like working adjacent to, creative folks or folks that are in UX, if you're not, sometimes I felt like I learned a lot even in like a 10-minute conversation by just asking, oh, like, what factored into you putting that there? Or like, what are you like learning from, the research that has been done, or like, what were the findings? I think people, or most people, at least the ones that I've run into, have been very willing to share kind of like their process. And so I think that can kind of be a good exposure to UX, like to kind of better understand what type of work folks do. I know that like for me, before joining the HCDE master's program, I didn't even know people did user research as a career. Like and then I found out about it and I was like, this is kind of awesome. But I think like, I don't know. I mean, I know user research has been done as a job for a very long time. I don't know if it was called that always. But like there are plenty of places that like don't have user researchers. So I feel like in terms of resources, like if you're, working adjacent, or, you work at a company with UX people, then you should, definitely like reach out. Maybe you can grab coffee with them and it'll be nice and share what they're working on. But there's also like a ton of like UX meetups, like ones around like research ops or, user research or UX design or general like human computer interaction-y type things. And I've gone to a couple of those, and I think that that's also like, sometimes they have like deep dives into, I don't know, I went to one about like localization, which was super interesting. That was like before when we could actually go to like events in person. So like last year. But like, I think that or like attending the Seattle Interactive Conference or Interaction 19. Interaction 19. Like meeting other people and kind of like getting more exposure to like the spectrum of roles in the field is also really helpful. Because I think there's a lot of, I mean, there's like, research and design, but I think there are also like blends of like creative technologist or, people who kind of like span both or like multiple like roles. Yeah.
You had mentioned in your kind of journey that your husband's coworker sort of informed you about HCDE or kind of this UX school or program you could go to. I'm curious, are other people in your kind of journey that were influential in helping you or providing information? Or I mean, I know in my journey, I had so many people that were willing to talk and, like you mentioned, sort of grab coffee. Curious if you've had others in your life.
Yeah, so the program manager that my husband worked with didn't recommend the program, but I think like it encouraged me to kind of like explore the field a little bit more. I think like once I kind of got myself into like the community, like a community of people that were interested in UX, especially having like joined the master's program. I think like for me, the biggest help that I got was like a lot of people, like the program is super diverse. There's like people who are like fresh out of their undergrad and they're just doing their masters. And then there's people that have been, working in industry and doing something else for like 20 years. And they're like, I'm going to go do UX now. And I'm like, here I am, like, 25 years old, 26 years old. And I'm like, I can't switch careers. I can't do that. It's too late. It's all over for me, And I feel like that's kind of an insane way of thinking about your career. But I think that's like, there is like definitely like stigma around like making a hard switch after you've already, put in the time. And I think like for me, being around folks that were like, no, you can totally just like not be an engineer. Like that's so easy. I think like that level of encouragement was probably more important than anything else about like, it's totally fine to like change your mind. Because I mean, I'd like switched like what I thought I might want to do like a million times. Like I've gone from like, I want to be a doctor, a nurse, like an art historian, like the whole, I just never found that one thing. And so I think like for me, there were like a number of people in my program that were like, you can totally do this. It's scary, but like you should totally do it if you think you might want to. And I was like, but what if I don't like it? And they're like, then just go back. Like it's not that hard. So I don't know, just I think that mindset is really helpful. So if you can surround yourself with people who are like very encouraging, whether they're in UX or not, I think that that's the move, you know? Yeah.
Cool. Anything else on this list of questions, or anything else you feel like would be important for people pursuing UX careers to understand or to know?
I think like one common thread through like all UX career, like professions or roles, is that like you gotta have empathy. Like you gotta like, I mean, certainly it's hard to hear sometimes that like people are unhappy with the things that you've done research on or built or designed or whatever. But I think like, I don't know, there's like this willingness to like try to understand or like try and empathize with the way that someone wants to use a product. And if you think the way that they use the product is wrong, like let's unpack that a little bit. Like let's dig into why they're using it like that and why you think that's wrong. And I think also like, I think a pretty common misconception is that like you can eliminate bias from the work that you're doing. And you can't. And I think like having that, like I think that realization for me was like really powerful, because it kind of changed the way that like I phrase like the things that I find out about talking to my users or the way I design research. And so I think like kind of honoring the fact that like you come with your own set of biases or things that you think are important, and so you're going to inject that into whatever you're building or designing. You know, I think that those are two really important things to think about. In terms of like resources, I don't know if I have like concrete resources. There are a couple of really good like UX blogs. DScout, I think they're a product, but they have like some really interesting blog posts, ones that go over like the different types of qualitative research, which I think a lot of people are just like, okay, so we'll interview people. And it's like, yeah, but there are like a lot of different ways you could do that. I think that that's like a pretty good resource. And there are like, I think even Medium has like a flavor of like UX blog or like a collective. Maybe it's called like the UX Collective. I'm making this up, but
I think you're right. UX Collective.
I think that like, I don't know, I really like reading the case studies that people do, either like because they worked on something or because they just felt compelled to like redesign. I think someone like redesigned the Starbucks app or something, and it was like really interesting, because people are like very, I don't know, very thorough and considerate, and I think you can learn a lot just from like hearing other people present their work, and like kind of picking like you I mean you're kind of picking their brain, but they're kind of offering it up as well by writing the blog. But yeah, I think you can learn a lot from kind of reading through those like mini case studies.
Oh, yeah, definitely lots of resources out there online for sure. So
yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much for taking some time today to share your journey and to kind of, for me to learn more about, how you went from a startup to Microsoft now, and just sort of, like I said, that thread of continually asking why. That's super cool, especially for someone who also is very curious.
Yeah, it's like, I guess I got a job where people won't necessarily tell me to be quiet when I ask a million questions. And so it's kind of like, and I mean, UX research is kind of like that too. But I think that's maybe why I love it. Yeah, that's funny. I never thought about it like that before.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, of course. Here to help anytime. Yeah, and so if people wanted to learn more about you or maybe even connect with you, reach out, is there a way that they can do that?
Yeah, my website is very much, I think it's down right now. I think I took it down because I wanted to redesign it, which is something that happens like once a year. I'm like, the theme's not good anymore. Let's redo it. And that's where my portfolio lives, which maybe will be up someday in the future. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not going to spell my name out, but maybe you can include it in the show notes so that people can get at it, because it's very long.
Well, yeah, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's cool to get an engineer perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks for having me. I always love talking about UX stuff. And I think I'm really glad that you're doing this podcast, because I think a lot of people think you need to go to grad school or get a degree. And obviously I'm in grad school, but I truthfully I think it taught me a lot, and I learn best from a classroom setting, but I certainly think that you could just teach yourself this. And I don't think that there's any I've had people ask me okay, how do I get a job doing this role or at Microsoft or at Blink? And I was there's no recipe. There's no I think I went to a career fair at HCD last year on behalf of Blink, and someone was what's the secret? And I'm there is no secret. I don't know what to tell you. Just be yourself. Show off the really cool things that you've designed or built. But yeah, I think it's just really good that you're giving exposure to the fact that people come from all over and become UX professionals, right? So
thank you again to Savannah for being on the podcast and teaching us more about the intersection of program management and UX. It was also great to hear about how she brings curiosity and empathy to her job. And I love that very encouraging message at the end of our conversation, that making the transition can be done. There were definitely times in my journey where I wasn't sure if it would ever happen, but it will. You just have to keep working at it and practicing patience. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're thinking about or pursuing a UX career or currently work in UX, I hope you find these discussions informative and helpful. You can find UX Pursuit wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now, and if you know others pursuing a career in UX, please tell them about the show. To learn more about me or the show, please go to uxpursuit.com. The website is a great place to learn more about all the guests from season 1 of the podcast. For all you listeners out there, I need your help. At the end of the first season, I'm planning a panel discussion to answer your UX career questions. And I know you have questions, so please email me at hello@uxpursuit.com, and we'll do our best to cover them in the final episode of the season. Lastly, a big thanks to Irene Barber for creating all the music you hear on the podcast. Be sure to check out her music under the artist name Nearby on Spotify or at nearbymusic.bandcamp.com. Again, thanks so much for listening. I'm Tim Bridgham, a senior UX researcher, and this is UX Pursuit.
It's kind of insane to me that I do what I do, because I feel like I somehow con someone into letting me do all the things. And I don't know, it's just wild to me that this is a job, but I do it.
That's great.